Welcome, Joan.
Hi. Hi, Lauren. How you doing?
I'm great. It's so lovely to have you here today.
Thank you.
Especially on the day of your album release. It actually comes out today, guys, the songs of Bob Dylan. Do you get nervous or anxious or butterflies when there's an album release, 20-somewhat years into your career?
A little bit. I get a little bit nervous actually more about doing the promotional stuff than I do about a regular show or a concert. Just because it's, mostly my world is about doing live shows, and I don't do a whole lot of this kind of stuff. So this is the hard part for me. Are you going to be with me and make sure it's okay?
100%. 100%.
All right,
Are we going to be with Joan today? We're going to be here with her, give her the support.
Okay.
Well, we are so honored to have you here today. Long fan of yours, and I know that you've been a long fan of Bob Dylan's for quite some time, and he's been a part of your world for several years, many years, from the start of your debut album, essentially.
Yes.
Why now felt like the right time to put out a full covers album of Bob Dylan?
Well, the idea started as something that's been in the back of my mind for a long time. It was inspired by a thing that Ella Fitzgerald did in the 1950s and early 60s. She put out a series of albums, each one devoted to a single writer. People like Cole Porter or Harold Arlen, the people that we consider the great American songbook writers. And she did a series of, I believe, 8 or 9 albums, and that became the songbook series. And I always thought that would be such a cool thing to kind of do my own version of that and do a more modern take on it. So we had this great residency at the Café Carlyle, and we presented the idea to them of why don't we pick one writer and do this, and they loved the idea. And the shows were really well received, and so we thought, this is great. We'll do our first record in this songbook series of Bob Dylan tunes. And then, of course, what's been happening in the country politically and socially, it makes it all the more timely to do a record of Dylan songs, because songs that he wrote 50 years ago, you listen to them now and they sound like they're talking about what we're all experiencing as a culture right now. So it turns out to be more timely than even we had anticipated. Absolutely.
We're in really a time of uncertainty, and I feel like some of this music, like you said, resonates even more today than it did back then, or at least equally. How did you channel that feeling when you were in the studio? What were you thinking about? Were there inspirations from today that you were thinking about when you were recording that music?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about a song being timely or topical, it doesn't mean that it's being very specific about a particular incident that's going on. It's more that the lyrics, in a poetic way, can refer to something that you're experiencing, or that the country or the culture as a whole are experiencing. So it wasn't that I had a particular incident in my mind, but that little phrases would sort of jump out at me as I was singing them, and I would even get like goosebumps and think, oh my God, this could be talking about this particular thing that's happening right now, whether it's political, or whether it's the fact that people in society are very divided from each other right now. It's all these very poetic phrases are like little time bombs in the song when you're up there singing it, and the meaning sort of rushes in on you and takes you over.
Bob Dylan has a huge catalog of music, as we know. How did you go about narrowing down which songs would actually appear on the record?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually one of the big challenges, because, of course, he has hundreds and hundreds of great songs. I had a few different lenses that I wanted to look at this material through. First of all, I wanted to do things from all throughout his writing career. People know his 1960s work, and they know a lot of the stuff from the mid-70s. Those are the most famous records. But he continued to write and to put out great albums. There were great songs on albums that weren't as familiar into the 80s, into the 90s, and even into the 2000s. So I wanted to pick things from all throughout his career. I also wanted to have a mixture of stuff that people were familiar with and that people might not know, so that you could, look at this song list and be like, oh, I want to hear this or that song, that's one of my favorites, and then also kind of give a little extra gift of, here's something that you may not know, so that people would have a chance to discover something about his work. And then I wanted to do things that I felt kind of a personal connection with, and that was more of just like an instinctual choice, things that I was drawn to instinctively.
You put your own twist on some of the songs. I understand you said you put a twist on like Tangled Up in Blue, maybe a feminist twist. How did you interpret these songs and really make them your own without, you know, you're not going to do Bob Dylan. Your voice is so different from Bob Dylan, but you really made these. If you listen to the album, it's Joan Osborne, you know? So how did you really make them yours?
Well, you know, as I kept digging and digging into this material with my co-producers and my collaborators, I started to feel like what an actor must feel like when they're doing Shakespeare. You know, the material is so rich and there's so much there. So really, I just started to try to connect with the words and the poetry of the lyrics as much as possible, and try to feel my way into what does this mean to me? How can I most soulfully present this and let this song inhabit me as I'm singing it? Which I guess is the job that any interpreter has when they're doing someone else's material, is how are you going to allow that song to live through you in that moment? And again, it's kind of an instinctual process. And we did a lot of you know, throwing ideas at things to come up with different arrangements. But in the end, it's a very sort of emotional and instinctual way of, you know, to guide yourself to do that.
You and Bob Dylan have recorded music before together. What was it like recording with him? And I know you met him years before that.
Well, you know, as you might imagine, I was kind of nervous to be in the studio with him. And in fact, once we actually got down to the recording of the song, we were on the same microphone. So my face was literally inches from Bob Dylan's face. But, you know, I have to say, his mind works so quickly, and he has this very restless intelligence. So we would try something and then we would move on to another idea very quickly, and then another idea very quickly. So I had to focus, you know, literally on his mouth as he was singing so that I could match my phrasing with my harmony to what he was doing. So I had to focus so intensely that that nervousness kind of fell away. And I realized, you know, when my back was to the door when he walked into the room, but I could feel that he had entered the room because it was like the weather had changed. And I think the people who work with him, because of that restless nature of his creativity, you've got to be very aware of what he's doing at every moment, or he's going to leave you behind. Sure. So I kind of took that lesson from that session, is like, you've got to pay attention to what he's doing at all moments, or else he's so restless in his creativity and so brilliant that he's on to the next idea before anybody else is, and you've got to really keep up with him.
You got to catch up.
Yeah,
like, where
exactly.
are you, Bob Dylan? Speaking of Bob Dylan, has he heard this? Does he know you recorded this album?
You know, I don't know if he's heard it or not. We've been in touch with the people at his publishing company, and they've been, you know, they were very supportive and saying, you know, whatever you need, if there's anything we can do to help you. But I don't imagine the man himself spends a lot of time listening to people recording his songs. Maybe he does, I don't know. It seems like he's got a lot of other stuff to do.
Yeah, and well, we're all busy, but yes, someone like him definitely is busy. Okay, so you've done covers for the years, you've written your own music. It's been 22 years, essentially, since you came on the scene with your debut album. Really, you were thrust into stardom, hit song, Grammy noms, the whole thing. Looking back, what was that like for a young woman coming up in the scene?
Well, it definitely kind of blindsided me, because I had been doing music as a live performer for years before that. I started out playing, you know, down here in New York City clubs, and kind of built a career and built a following over a number of years, and, you know, spread out to doing things over the Northeast, places like DC and Boston. And I kind of thought of myself as a lifer at that point. Like, this is what I've found to do that really speaks to me, so I'm going to continue to do this. And I didn't think about, I want to be famous, I want to be rich, I want to get my picture taken. That stuff wasn't really part of my motivation for doing it. So I was kind of blindsided by all of that when it happened with the first album. But I think I was more prepared for just the work that comes with that kind of success, because I had that grounding in playing little clubs and building up a following very slowly by reaching out to audiences, really kind of one at a time through live performance. So I had a certain level of confidence that I knew what I was doing, and that I, you know, deserved to be there. And I think if you had maybe maybe if I had had this sort of typical fairy tale story that people think about of like you're singing one night in a club and somebody comes in and says, I'm going to make you a star. And, you wouldn't have had the kind of grounding and confidence that that sort of building it up slowly gave to me. So,
Really,
so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and really a grassroots sort of initiative. You're sort of a businesswoman at the same time because you're going to running around to clubs and everything. Do you think that that's helped you kind of continue to cement your career and as you go forward in this business, which could be a racket, really?
I mean, it's a crazy business and it's insane. And my parents, when I told them that I was singing in bars and clubs, they were like, "What? You're smart. You could be a doctor. You could be a lawyer." But I think there was something about just that notion that even if you're playing in front of thousands of people, it's really one person at a time that you're trying to speak to and that you're trying to communicate with. And, coming up as I did playing in little clubs, you get that honed into you in a very direct way over and over again. So you have that understanding about what you're doing. You're there to communicate something emotionally to another person. And if you can keep that with you, then all this other crazy stuff that happens, it doesn't really sway you that much because you know what your job is.
That debut hit album that you had featured the hit "One of Us." A lot of us got to know you from that song for the first time, and that was written by the singer from the Hooters.
Yeah, Eric Mozillian.
It was everywhere, and it's still everywhere. We still hear it today. Can you talk a little bit about that? What that song meant at that time, what it means to you singing it now, and if there are any misconceptions about what it was?
That song definitely hit a nerve with people, and as you say, it's had a life beyond my version of it for sure. So it continues to speak to people. My thought about it when I first heard it was that this is a song that is kind of like as if a little kid is coming up and tugging on your sleeve and asking you a question in that way that little kids have, of asking you something that you've sort of taken for granted and that you don't think about anymore, but they ask you in this way where you're like, oh, I don't really know the answer to that question. And it's such an obvious thing, So I think that's part of why the song was a success, is that it wasn't telling people what they were supposed to think. It was asking them to search their own hearts and their own minds about these very large questions of God and spirituality. And I think that that's why it touched people. People ask me all the time, do you get sick of singing it? And in fact, I really don't, because our version of the song has kind of changed as we've done it over the years, and I think that's the mark of a good song, that your interpretation of it can grow as you grow as a person and as an artist. So it's very different now the way that we do it live. It's very stripped down, and it's this very kind of intimate moment with the audience, and I can feel that people are connecting with it, and I don't get sick of that. That's still very moving to me.
It's kind of grown with you as you've grown and you've been through the industry. You've changed it to make it, different and keep it interesting for yourself. I like that.
Absolutely. You have to be able to do that, because if you're just going up and like trying to make things exactly like the record was night after night, that's just boring.
Right. For you. And you want to keep it interesting for yourself.
Yeah.
So you put out this covers record. You've, written music. You've co-written music. What's next? Do you see yourself going back to songwriting? Do you have any other aspirations for what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of having my career as a person who interprets other people's material as one lane that I can move in, and then my writing as another lane, as sort of parallel lanes that I can travel in. I feel really fortunate that I can do both things. I've also got a side project band called Trigger Hippie, which is kind of a meat and potatoes rock and roll band, and we're very close to finishing our second album. So that might be the next thing that I release that has original material on it. And of course, having been immersed in this Bob Dylan material for these weeks and months, that's very inspiring to a songwriter. So I've also been writing other material that is really more about what my next record might be. So it's all good. I'm still engaged, and I'm still loving doing this. So as long as people are still showing up and listening, then I'll keep doing it.
Well, we're glad for that. Your Twitter handle says something about flying under the radar.
Yeah.
So how do you?
Not so much today.
Not today, but do you feel like that's just been who Joan Osborne is today? Like, you're playing music, you're doing what you love, but you fly under the radar through it all?
Well, I think I'm in a very lucky place, because I had this massive hit a while back, yet that was kind of an earlier incarnation. People are not standing around me expecting me to come up with some big pop hit. I don't have those pressures put on me. And yet I still have an audience that will come to see the live shows and that will, hopefully buy this record or stream it or whatever. I've got enough of an audience that enables me to keep doing this so that I can have a lengthy career as a working artist. And that's very meaningful to me. And I think that's a real privilege. I know that it's a privilege. Not everybody gets to do that. Not everybody gets to have a career in music in the first place, much less to be able to do it for decades. So I know I'm in a lucky situation, and I really try to give my fans the appreciation and to let them know that I do not take it for granted.
Well, we're happy for that. And also, I want to get some questions from the crowd, but before I do, our partners over at Yahoo Music had a question about you and women in rock in the 1990s. You came up in the 90s. We also saw Alanis Morissette, Sheryl Crow during that time.
Yeah.
There was this amazing time of women in rock. It was also the time of Lilith Fair. Why did that go away? Why do we think that's not that excitement around that music at that height isn't where it was, isn't there now as it was then? Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know that I would necessarily agree that the music isn't out there. I think the media, there are cycles that the media goes in, and something becomes hot or it becomes trendy. It just happened that was going on with women artists and women in rock at that moment. But you can look back at women in music and in rock music, generations before that, and that's still happening now. There's a lot of amazing artists that are female artists right now. People like Regina Spektor, people like Trixie Whitley. You can, if you're looking for that, you can find it. Maybe the media has their focus somewhere else right now, but there have always been and there always will be amazing women who are great artists in rock music and blues music and all kinds of music.
Indeed. Okay, guys, lots of questions from the crowd, and I know we have a song performance which we're really excited about.
Yes.
So who wants to go first? Oh, here we go.
Hi, Joan.
Hey.
My first question would be, as you were growing up with all the music you were listening to, what was or was there a Dylan song that first impacted on you that said just really caught your ear?
I have to say, I don't think that I had much of a connection to Bob Dylan when I was very young and growing up. I was too young to hear his music on the radio. And by the time I really got into listening to the radio, it was artists like Led Zeppelin and The Who and the Rolling Stones. And so I don't know that I really heard that much of him as a young person. But once I came to New York and started doing music seriously, a lot of it was happening right down in the West Village over here. And the ghost of Dylan kind of haunts those streets. Some of the clubs that he used to play in are still there, and they certainly were still there when I was doing it. And if you're trying to learn about American music, he's one of these sort of cornerstone artists that you have to learn about. And also, if you walk up and down Bleecker Street on a Saturday night, in some folk club or some rock club or some blues club, somebody's going to be playing a Bob Dylan song because he's that important. So I think it wasn't until I was a little older that I really got that connection to his work. But once I did, of course, he's an amazing, towering artist. And I think everyone has to have some kind of, you have to sort of have a reckoning with Bob Dylan if you are interested in American music.
Great. Next question.
Hey, Joan. I know that you got to do both original music and covers, so I was just wondering, do you prefer one or the other, or is it just both has become more part of you?
I mean, to write a song and to be proud of that, there's something really gratifying about that. To be able to create something that hasn't existed in the world before, I mean, that's amazing. And I love doing that. But I also love listening to great singers, and not every great singer is also a great songwriter. So I feel like there's definitely a place for both of those things. And like I said, I'm glad that I can do either one, and I don't have to choose just one thing. So that's as good of an answer, I guess, as I can give you.
Thanks. We have one last question from the crowd here.
Hello. Hi. I just wanted to know, do you have any memorable moments from touring and performing?
Do I have any memorable moments from touring and performing? Gosh, so many. you know, like I said, I've been doing this for so long, and I've been able to perform with some amazing people. Not only Bob Dylan, I got to sing with Stevie Wonder to induct Gladys Knight and the Pips into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I got to sing with Luciano Pavarotti in Italy. I've been to the Dalai Lama's monastery in the foothills of the Himalayas in India and performed for him. So, you know, to have had these kind of musical moments has been amazing. But then also just an ordinary night where you're just playing a show for your fans, you know, that moment of connection between yourself and the band and the audience, I feel like that's like a higher level of consciousness. And I can, you know, I'm so lucky that that's my job, is to be able to go to that place, you know, on a pretty regular basis, and to have that sense of communion with people. And it's, I just feel so fortunate. So even an ordinary night can be an amazing experience if you're doing music.
Thank you. And that ordinary night inspired this record. So so we thank you for those questions. Give it up one more time. The album's out now. It's called
you so
Songs
much.
of Bob
Thanks.
Dylan. Joan
Yeah.
Osborne, everyone.